Hello and welcome to another video. You'll have to forgive the coat in this video. At this time of year here, it gets really cold in this building. It's an old brick building that doesn't really seem to insulate very well. No central heating in here. I run electric heaters a lot of the time and dehumidifier because, yeah, damp can be a problem here. So I have to always be on top of that. Like I say, old building. But yeah, this time of year, I'm pretty much always wearing a coat or some level of extra layers in here. So yeah, anyway, in my last video, I talked about some of the gear purchases that I've made over the years that I really love and I'm really happy with. In this video, I wanted to talk about some of the regret purchases that I've made, which have been significantly fewer than the stuff I bought that I've really liked. But yeah, there have been some regrets along the way. I think most of us have experienced this, and certainly there's a lot of stuff I've bought and have since sold over the years because, you know, you're learning all the time. As you make these gear purchases, you buy things and then realize it isn't quite what you need, or it is for a time, but then you outgrow that piece of gear and you need to upgrade. So to start with, I wanted to talk about my Sontronics STC2 large diaphragm microphone. This is a cardioid mic. It's pretty unremarkable in its sound. Sounds fine, but it just, yeah, doesn't sound particularly great, I've found, on any source. And unlike most of the other mics that I own, even the cheaper condensers or dynamics that I own, all of them I find generally serve a purpose somewhere. Right now I'm recording my voice with my Audio-Technica AT2020, even though I probably have nicer mics for capturing dialogue. I mean, yeah, I'd say I do, but yeah, I've kind of been having luck with the AT2020 recording the last handful of videos. I've decided to use this just because it's a mic that I don't often use on other stuff, so I kind of just have it permanently set up for this camera configuration, so it's kind of ready to go. It can stay up most of the time, and yeah, it seems to work well for recording these videos and recording my voice. My Bifaley V5, I talked about the Bifaley mics in my last video and how I really liked the Bifaley BF 414s that I bought, but the V5 I found was a fine microphone and maybe a little hyped in the top end and a little unnatural sounding and like not in a good way. But yeah, I found that it's fine, but I haven't really found a good use for it yet. And this is another one of these mics that I just haven't found anything that I really like it on. Like I say, it sounds fine, but it just sounds like a cheaper Chinese large diaphragm condenser to me, even though these are actually UK made. Yeah, Sontronics are a UK company, and I believe at least at the time I bought this, all their mics they made in the UK, and they were quite a small company. That may have changed now, I don't know, but yeah, even though they're not necessarily Chinese condensers, they sound like it to me. They sound like cheap mics. They're, you know, not the most natural sounding and kind of have that unflattering, slightly hyped top end that just doesn't sound very natural, sounds a little brittle. Other than that, I can't remember the sonic character of this that much because I just almost never use it unless, you know, I'm out of mics and I need an extra mic for something, which rarely happens even when I'm recording drums and using a lot of mics. As well as the STC2, I have a pair of these STC10s, which I would say compared to the STC2, these are actually pretty decent for the money. They're quite cheap. At the time I bought them, I think they were under £100 each. I think they're still similarly priced now, but I've had these a long time, you know, maybe at least 10 years or so, and they're fine. You know, they don't sound amazing, but I've had pretty good luck, like recording stuff like acoustic guitar with them. One thing that makes me regret having bought these one specifically is just because of a problem I've had with one of them, where I'll get like this wind kind of staticky noise, like intermittently, which typically when you get that kind of thing, it tends to be because there's moisture on the mic capsule, which, normally if that happens, putting it like in a box with some silica gel or near a dehumidifier or just near a heater or something, not too close, obviously, but something basically to draw or dry up the moisture, draw the moisture out or dry it up, and that will fix it. I've had that happen to one of my other mics before, which there's a particular corner in my studio where it does get a bit damp, and I always have to have a little dehumidifier, one of the passive ones there alongside my electric big dehumidifier, which runs a lot of the time overnight here. If I left a mic in this corner, I often put mics in the corner as like a room or trash mic when I'm recording drums, but I forgot it was there at the end of the session and didn't pack it away. I left it there. The next day when I plugged it in, it had this staticky wind kind of noise, and I knew it's because it'd gotten a bit of moisture on the capsule, being in that slightly damp corner of the room. But that was fixed by putting it in a case with some silica gel, and that drew the moisture out, dried it up. This, I've never been able to fix with this microphone, and I actually sent it back to Sontronics not long after buying it. In fairness to them, their customer service was brilliant. They were really hands-on. The actual main guy behind the company, who, at least at the time, I think he either built the mics himself or at least designed them himself and oversaw a lot of the manufacture. He took on the mic himself when I sent it back to him and tested it, and said he couldn't replicate the problem I was having. So what he did was essentially gave me a new mic, just replaced all the innards. I'm not sure if the capsule was replaced, but he said it basically replaced everything inside, and it was just the housing that was the same. So I thought, great, that'll fix it. Got it back, and it still had the same problem. And at that point, I kind of gave up with it, which maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have asked for a refund or whatever, but I didn't. I kind of just dealt with it at the time. I think this was really the only pair of small diaphragms I had at the time, and I was just recording myself at home. And yeah, I kind of just dealt with it, even though it was an annoying issue. It was intermittent, so sometimes the mic would be okay. But as it stands these days, I hardly ever use these, because with the intermittent problem with one of them, if I'm going to use them as a pair, for stereo miking, like an acoustic guitar or something, I can't rely on it because it has this intermittent problem. So it's not something I would want to throw up when I have paying clients, because potentially it's going to ruin a recording. So it just kind of makes that mic unusable. So for both of those Sontronic mics, I kind of regret buying them, especially the SDC2, because I almost never use it. I just, don't particularly like the sound of it, and I've never found anything that it really worked well on. Based on my experience, I wouldn't really recommend Sontronics mics. I haven't used many of their other mics, and I'm sure many people have great experiences with the stuff they make, but just personally, based on my experiences with those two particular microphones, I don't think I'll buy anything from them again. For me, there are better mics out there, even at that kind of price point, the more low end price point. Next up is these kind of 3D printed microphone clips. So this one in particular is from Wilkinson Audio. They actually, side note, make a really cool plugin called the Bleeder, which is for removing drum bleed, as the name might suggest. And I used that for years before switching to Black Soul Audio Silencer. For me, I found it did a slightly better job than Debleeder. But Debleeder's great, and you can't go wrong with it. And up until the point of Silencer coming out, I felt like that was one of the best plugins on the market for dealing with drum bleed. But they also make these mic clips. This particular one is for XY technique. So they're little 3D printed clips for doing stereo miking techniques. So you can get ones for XY, ORTF, Fredman, you know, pretty much any of the stereo mic techniques. Although, yeah, I guess Fredman isn't exactly a stereo technique, but yeah, double miking techniques in general. So I have the XY one from Wilkinson and the ORTF. And more recently, I bought from another company who sell on eBay. Same thing, 3D printed clips, one of their Fredman clips and one for doing, so typically you'd do this on a snare drum. That's the really common use case where you have a dynamic mic and an STC. Like you, often, you know, you just tape them together and line the capsules up. I like doing that a lot on snare top. I just wanted just an easier and more consistent way of doing that. That's quicker as well. Because with Fredman, normally, you know, I've got to get two 57s on two mic stands, get them, you know, lined up in the right way on a guitar amp. And then with the snare miking technique, I usually use my Telefunken M80, and then I take that to an SDC, like my SE V8, I think it's called. Yeah, because of the body shape of the M80, to get the SDC straight when I tape it to the M80, I have to wedge in a little bit of foam where the body of the M80 gets narrower towards the XLR end. That's a little time consuming, a little tedious. So I wanted a more consistent, quicker, easier way of doing that. The biggest problem I found with a lot of these clips that can house or hold SDCs is that they're all designed for thinner bodied SDCs than any of the SDCs that I own, which in my experience, most SDCs are this kind of larger size. But you can see here on this clip, it says NT5, which I think NT5s are a smaller housing. And you can get like this Sontronics or my SE pencil condensers to fit on these, but you have to like really force them in, and it kind of flexes the plastic out. But then they can pop out really easily. So I usually have to tape around them because they're so stiff in there. Like they're kind of annoying to get angled upright. And by that point, it's kind of easier just to do, like in the case of XY, do that on a stereo bar or on two mic stands. So it kind of defeats the purpose of the clip. And with all the ones I've seen, they're all 3D printed, and you know they're fine. They do the job, and none of them that I have broken. Not that I've used them a ton. They just look and feel a little cheap, and for what you pay, I mean, I think this clip was like £15. You know, it's quite expensive for something that's just a little 3D printed thing, and also they don't even have a mic thread on them. I have seen some ones out there that do, but most of them you have to put one of the mics on a clip and then attach this clip to it and then attach the other mic to the clip. Yeah, most of them, they're just not that easy to use. They kind of defeat the point of having a clip that is supposed to make life easier. Yeah, these are kind of a regret purchase, all of the ones that I bought, because I basically never use them, and they just sit in a drawer, and it was kind of wasted money, especially given how expensive they are for what they are. I've done quite a lot of searching online for different mic clips like this, and I've not found anything that's quite what I'm looking for. But it seems like a really big gap in the market. I'm just waiting for a company to come along and to make something that's not 3D printed, attaches to a mic stand directly, and yeah, you know, is more kind of versatile in the size of mic it can hold, and is just generally higher quality, easier to use, and you know, makes it easier than using a stereo bar or two stands. So if anyone knows of any company that does make something of that quality, let me know in the comments down below. I certainly not come across it, but if you have, I'd love to hear about it. So yeah, let me know. Next up is a guitar I talked about in my last video, and this is my Martin D17M. And this is a kind of regret purchase. which I'll explain why. But as I talked about in my last video, I ended up buying more recently my Alvarez acoustic. And I bought that because I wanted a more versatile guitar that had more projection and basically offered what this guitar didn't. This guitar is, I think when I bought it, it was like £1,800. I think I said £2,000 in my last video, but yeah, it's actually 1,800, and I think it still is around that price point. I think they still make them new. I don't think this model's been discontinued yet. I bought this maybe like 10 years ago or so, and at the time I wish I'd been more knowledgeable on guitar setups. The higher end Martins, they come out of the factory with quite high action. The idea being that you're supposed to go get them set up after buying them, get them set up by a luthier and get the action adjusted to how you like it. So they come with high action so that there's the kind of flexibility to adjust it as low or as high as you would like. So when I played this in the guitar shop I bought it from, I thought that was just the case, and I thought, well, you know, I like the sound of it, I like how it feels generally, and I'll be able to go and get it set up and get the action adjusted lower. I now know that a lot of these Martins, the D17Ms, and I think like the D15, they were coming out of the factory needing a neck reset, so they had bowed necks kind of straight out of the factory or not long after. You know, normally an acoustic guitar hopefully doesn't ever need a neck reset, but you know, if it does happen, it's something that will happen after maybe, you know, a decade of having it or longer. It's not something you expect to happen, you know, within months of a guitar being made. But yeah, basically this guitar had a bowed neck, and I didn't realize it at the time. Didn't realize it until after I bought it. I bought this on a finance scheme the shop did themselves, where essentially they held the guitar for me and then I paid off a little each month until I'd paid it off. And when I paid it off, I asked the shop if they could do a setup on it. I think I took it home for a little bit, but then I took it back to them to get them to do a setup. When it came back from the setup, it felt like they'd essentially done nothing to it. The action was still really high, and yeah, it just wasn't right. And at that point, that should have been a red flag, and I should have maybe have thought of taking it back to Martin. I kind of just dealt with really high action, but it meant that I didn't actually play it all that much, and it didn't get recorded a lot. But then more recently, I took it to a really good luthier friend of mine who, yeah, confirmed that the neck did have quite a severe bow. Neck resets are really expensive to do, and at this point, of course, it didn't have warranty from Martin. It's well past that point. So he basically suggested that he would do what he could with it without having to do a neck reset. And what he did was he shaved down the bridge and then the saddle as well. So the saddle, you might not be able to see in the video, but it's about as low as it can go. It's really like only just popping out of the bridge piece. What he did to it, it's kind of fixed the issues with it. The action on it is pretty much perfect now. It's about as low as I'd want it. The intonation is fine now. It's nicely intonated. So you really can't tell that the neck has quite a significant bow on it. And you know, the guitar feels lovely to play. Also looks gorgeous. I mean, this is one of the nicest looking model Martins that I've seen over the years. So I hear you ask, what is wrong with it that makes it a regret? Well, the fact that I had all these issues with, you know, the neck needing a reset, obviously not what you want when you spend £1,800 on a guitar. But also I just find that when I sit here and play it, so I'll play it a little for you. It's not perfectly in tune, but you know, it's good enough for the video. My hands are pretty cold at the moment, but you get the idea. you get the idea. It's when I sit here and play it, it sounds lovely. It does have a nice sound to it. It's got a nice kind of sweet mid-range. It's not overly boomy. I do wish maybe it was a little fuller in the low end, but that's just not the sound of a guitar like this. And it's got quite a tight, controlled low end response. But it's not overly loud, this guitar. It doesn't have a ton of projection, which I just find recording in a space like this that's quite small and therefore heavily acoustically treated and therefore quite dead sounding. I think a guitar like this works better in a livelier room where it can sort of the room can carry the sound of the guitar more, just allow it to sing more. And I find Martins are generally they always just seem to be one of the harder acoustic guitars to record. Acoustic guitar is generally, can be a little tricky of an instrument to record and to get the sound that you want. Yeah, I don't know. I just find the sound of this guitar often is not what I'm after. It has, when you're finger picking on the B and the E string, you probably won't be able to hear in this video, but when you're miking up properly and stuff, depends on the player, of course, and the song, and where you're playing, what tuning, and so on, if you've got it capoed. But on the B and the E string, I find there are just these top end overtones that can be a little too shimmery for my liking, especially because it just seems to mostly be on those strings, so it just kind of sticks out a bit to me. It's just hard to record this well. I have done in the past, and I've gotten some great results with it, but I just wanted more of an all-rounder guitar, and I feel like this guitar just wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. If you have, say if you took a whole bunch of D17Ms or any particular model of guitar, every one is going to sound quite different, even though they're the same model. It's just the nature of acoustic instruments like this that are hand built. Even when they're factory built, they're always going to sound a bit different. And you often hear people say, whether it's an expensive Martin or Taylor or say a cheap Takamine, people will pick a particular guitar and that guitar will just, for whatever reason, just be so much better sounding than any of the other guitars of the same model. You'll have somebody that just kind of lucks out and gets this really wonderful sounding guitar. I feel like I maybe got the opposite with this D17M, and I happened to pick one that was a bit of a dud, maybe. Which is not to say it still sounds good, but I don't think it sounds like an £1,800 guitar necessarily. So yeah, it's slight regret with this one. Like I say, it's a beautiful instrument. Build quality wise, the whole neck reset thing, and then also I found that some of the inlays around here, just on this underside here, it's just started to lift off slightly. So, again, not what you'd expect necessarily from a guitar of this price point. I wouldn't ever want to sell this, I don't think. I have thought about it, but there's still something about this guitar that I do like. It's very enjoyable to play. So it's maybe not a guitar I'm going to record with much, but it's still a guitar that I love to play. And in that sense, it's not a regret, because I do enjoy having it in my collection. But yeah, for all the issues mentioned, there is a bit of regret there with this guitar as well. So moving on. Next is my surround sound setup here in the control room. I say surround sound, it's kind of a cobbled together surround setup. So as my rear / side speakers, I've got a set of JBL Control 1s, and then you might be able to kind of see by me above my head, above my monitor screen, I have a Yamaha center speaker. So very mismatched. You've got a set of JBLs as rears, Yamaha as your center speaker, and then of course my Cali in 8s as my main left, right, front speakers. I basically never use this setup as surround. This came from the old studio, and when me and my business partner at the time, when we moved there, we thought we might potentially get a fair bit of interest from post-production clients, doing like film, TV work, that sort of thing, maybe video game stuff. But yeah, we didn't really have any budget for a surround setup. So I bought secondhand these JBLs and the Yamaha very cheap. I think I spent a total of £50 or so, like 20 quid for the JBLs off eBay, and I think 20 quid for the Yamaha. I bought a cheap 4-channel Behringer amp, which in fairness, I paid like £150 or so for that. And I actually still use it because it powers my my AKG mix cubes on the outsides of my Callies behind me. It powers those, and it also powers my sub, which is built into the wall behind me. That was a custom built sub that I built. So that amp powers those now, and so it still has a use. So I don't really regret buying that amp, but I do regret the surround setup because it's just kind of pointless, especially in this control room. In the old place, we never really ended up doing any kind of surround post-production work anyway. I doubt this setup because it's so mismatched, and the JBL control ones, like, they're fine speakers. They're really quite good actually for what they are, and they're quite common in home cinema setups and used in bar and restaurant installs and stuff like that. But for mixing in surround, they're probably not the best for critical listening. And yeah, like I say, in the old place, we basically never ended up using them. It was one of those where we did it more just to say that we had some kind of surround setup, but at the same time, it really wasn't anything worth mentioning because it's not a very good surround setup for a recording studio. So yeah, and then in this control room, it's just way too small, I think, to even do any surround work in. I've never tried, to be honest. I put the surrounds in when I set this room up just because I had them and I thought I may as well, but I've literally never used them in here, and I doubt I ever will. So they're kind of pointless. So it's a bit of a regret. At least I didn't really spend any real money on it. But yeah, I keep thinking about just taking them down. I suppose they look kind of cool, but yeah, they're a little bit pointless in here. Next up is my Behringer HA8000 headphone amp. I bought this at the time primarily because I felt like I needed 8 channels of headphone mixes. In reality, in this place, with how small it is, there was one occasion when I recorded a string quartet and I had a singer and a piano player as well. So that was 6 headphone mixes. But generally, most of the time, even when I'm recording multiple players at once, when I've done that with bands on occasion, I've maybe used 3 or 4 headphone mixes at the same time. Most of the time, I'm generally only using 1 or 2 headphone mixes. So the reality is, in this place, I don't necessarily need 8 channels of headphone amp. But at the time, I thought it was good to just have as many headphone channels as I could possibly have, more than I needed. Also, so I had some spare channels in case a headphone channel went down or something. Although I suppose if the unit's going to go down itself, it's probably going to be the whole thing rather than individual channels. But you never know. It's good to have spare channels. Yeah, in a lot of ways, the HA8000 is fine as a headphone amp. I think it sounds fine generally. Like, I don't have any real complaints about the sonics of it. It's plenty loud, like way louder than you'd ever need with most headphones. Like, I dread to think what it would be like if you turn the volume all the way up on any channel. I'm sure it would just blow your head off. I normally have the volumes on each channel like around 9 to 12 o'clock. Sometimes for drummers, I need it more around 12 o'clock because, yeah, drummers, especially listening to click tracks, they might need it quite loud to keep in time. But most of the time, the volume's around 9 o'clock. So plenty of volume. Sounds fine generally. And one of the main selling points for me was the fact that each channel has its own individual auxiliary in, which means that you can send individual headphone mixes to each headphone output. So that means you can do 8 entirely independent headphone mixes, which is great. A lot of headphone amps I've found, like, they might have up to 8 channels of output, but they only have, say, 1 or 2 stereo inputs. So you can only send 1 or 2 headphone mixes across all of those channels. The good thing about the Behringer is that you've got the 8 independent auxiliary inputs, which is, perfect for me. That was what I was looking for. The thing that I don't like about it and has made me regret having it as my headphone amp here is the fact that it's ridiculously noisy. Prior to buying it, I did hear people talk about the self noise of the unit. I'm not talking about like noise of fan noise or anything. It's fanless. It's quiet, the unit itself in its operation. It's just the noise floor of the headphone channels. It's really, really noisy. You get loads of static, I find, even unless you're like below 9 o'clock, like you've only got it a few notches up. Anything above that, you're going to start to get hiss and white noise. Whereas when I heard people talk about the noise in reviews, most people said you had to crank it a fair amount to really start to hear the noise. If you're listening back to a track, say when a singer's recording their vocals and you've got a full band mix in the headphones, you're not going to hear that noise. But if you're recording something like solo acoustic guitar, the noise is very apparent. I think headphone mixes is really, really important to have as good a headphone sound as you can for artists, because ultimately, if it sounds really good in their headphones, that's going to make them feel the music more, and because of that, they're going to deliver a better performance. So I think that's really key, because it doesn't matter like how well you mic things up and how well you're capturing the performance. If you're not getting a great performance, then none of that really matters. So I think headphone mixes are really important. And although I've never really had any major complaints about the sound of my headphones here in the studio, on one occasion I did have a drummer sort of comment that after they recorded their take and came in the control room and heard it on the monitors, they said something along the lines of like, "Oh, it sounds a lot better than I was expecting." I think partly that's because, when a drummer's tracking, a lot of the time you don't need all of the individual drum mics in your headphones. All you really need is a bit of the overheads maybe and kick drum mic, and that's fine. So they're not sort of really hearing what all of the mics are picking up and the cohesive sound of the drum recording. It's just something that is often just bugs me personally, because when I listen to headphones here, like when I'm setting up mics and I'm checking things, I just don't like the sound of it. So even though I've not had any real major complaints, I really want something that's quiet and doesn't have loads of hiss. I just want something clean and quiet. Like otherwise, I don't have any major issues with the Behringer, but it's just that self noise. It's too much for me, and it's something I really want to change and improve upon here. So if anybody knows of anything better, anything between 4 to 8 channels of headphone amp that has individual aux inputs, so I can do individual mixes for every channel, that's quiet, please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear, because it seems quite hard to sort of find online like conclusive information as to how noisy a headphone amp is going to be. So let me know down in the comments. That would be amazing. Following on from my headphone amp, I'd like to talk about another sort of regret of mine, and that's my RME UFX3, which is my audio interface that I'm using here in the studio. I don't necessarily regret buying this in a lot of ways, but I think if I were to buy something again now, I wouldn't necessarily pick the RME. In most ways, I don't have any complaints about the RME. The sound of the unit is fantastic. It's ultra clean and transparent, great converters, great onboard mic preamps. It's a great interface in terms of its sonics. Build quality is amazing. It's really robust, feels reliable, feels like it's going to last a lifetime. RME are known for their excellent driver support. So even interfaces they made like 20 years ago, they're still supporting with up-to-date drivers for the latest operating systems, both on Mac and Windows. What I was really looking for was something that had a ton of flexibility and expandability so that it was going to be future-proof in that respect. And the RME ticks that box as well. You've got 12 local analog ins and outs, and then on top of that you've got ADAT, you've got MADI, which MADI alone, MADI I think at 48 kilohertz you can add up to 64 ins and outs, which is, you know, more than enough for me. I guess you're probably asking me, what is it that made me regret buying the UFX3? What is it that I don't like about it? That for me is the software, RME Total Mix FX, which I don't dislike this for a lot of reasons that most people do. Most people talk about it being difficult to use, it being, you know, clunky and overly complicated. I disagree with a lot of those statements. I quite like the workflow of it. Very much resembles a digital mixing console, which is a very familiar thing to me. Also, you know, being somebody that works in live sound. So the workflow is very, very similar to a digital mixing console. Tons of flexibility with routing, but I don't think it's overly complicated to use. I do think it is a little bit clunky in its whole layout, and there's a lot of stuff that's more hidden than maybe it should be. But overall, I think the user experience with it is like, it's fine. Generally, it's not too bad. It's the lack of certain features for me that make it a bit of a nightmare to use. The biggest one, I've done several videos on this, so I won't go extensively into it. You can watch those videos if you're interested in hearing more. One of the biggest issues for me is the fact that you can't reorder channels, which then makes queuing things when I'm tracking, both in the control room and in the live room with headphone mixes, just makes monitoring stuff and queuing headphone mixes a bit of a nightmare, because depending on what preamps you're using for different things, you end up with inputs like in a completely nonsensical order. And there's numerous other things like that. The ARC USB controller, which I bought, that is basically a glorified volume knob. The assignability, there isn't stuff like macros. It's just really inflexible in terms of what you can assign to those buttons. The differentiation between the workspaces and scenes is very confusing. There's not really much difference, and yet there is at the same time. Stuff that you just can't do, like I want to be able to mute my sub, and when I mute my sub on the ARC USB, I want it to turn off the crossover EQs that I have on my Callies and my main monitors. I have that EQ, that crossover happening within Total Mix. You can't do that, or at least you can't do that in an easy way. You can only do that by saving different scenes, but then any monitoring levels you have on inputs is going to be affected by that. It's just really difficult to do a lot of simple things that could easily be done if there was some sort of macro function. It just makes the ARC USB a bit redundant. For what you pay for it, it's like over £100. It feels very crippled by the software. The Total Mix FX Remote app, which is only available on iOS, not on Android, which just seems ridiculous in this day and age. But the iPad app feels like a very stunted version of the desktop software. There are some really good features of the interface that are massively held back by the software. So for that reason, I kind of regret buying the UFX3. And I think if I were to buy again, I probably would have gone Antelope, because that seems like the better software experience maybe, but with a similar kind of feature set to the RME, and maybe not as good hardware or driver support as RME, but still, pretty decent. If you use RME yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the whole Total Mix thing, and go watch those videos if you're interested in hearing me talk more about that. So last but not least is my upright piano, which is Shipman London, it says on the piano. I don't really know much about it. I assume it was made by a company called Shipman that were in London in the UK. I don't know if they still exist as a company. I would guess probably not. Um, it strikes me as one of those upright pianos that was, one of the typical uprights that you'd find in a family home, like say working class, middle class families. So basically, a cheap upright piano that sounds fine but isn't anything remarkable. I could sort of liken it to, Squire versus Fender. It's a fine sounding piano. I'd say it's one of those that wouldn't work very well in a solo piano piece, or like a ballad or something like that. It's the kind of piano sound that fits better in a full band arrangement. It's not an overly rich or detailed piano. It kind of almost has a bit of like a honky tonk kind of sound to it. It's not the most versatile of pianos. And for that reason, it's not that great to have as the only acoustic piano you have in a studio. I got it from a company on Facebook Marketplace. So they're a reseller of pianos. They buy up old secondhand pianos or get pianos donated to them. They do them up, they tune them up, service them, make sure they're playing well and don't have issues, fix them up, and then sell them on. But occasionally they have a piano that isn't good enough for them to sell, but also isn't bad enough for them to just scrap. So instead, what they do is they give them away for free. They just charge the delivery, which I think, is totally fair. So, for what I paid, it's kind of fine. And I do think there is that kind of stigma in a recording studio where clients come in, and even though if you have an upright acoustic piano that doesn't actually sound that great or isn't that versatile and wouldn't work that well, say in a solo piano piece, and actually you'd be better off using piano sample libraries, where you could get a sound that was better suited to that kind of arrangement. The client is always going to be biased to like the real instrument because it just kind of looks more impressive. Of course, an actual piano often is going to, even a piano that's not in great condition or, is a cheaper piano, it's still probably going to play a little nicer than a lot of MIDI controllers. I have quite a nice MIDI controller. I've got an Ovation 61 key. It's semi-weighted. And I know from piano players playing it that, it is generally quite nice to play, but it's still not as good as the real thing. But yeah, a lot of time clients, I think they see the real piano as being like more authentic, even though a lot of the time it might actually not be the better option over sample libraries. And of course, sample libraries, you can get more versatility. You can have a whole bunch of different piano sounds, as opposed to if you've got an upright in a studio, unless you've got a really large studio and you can have a whole bunch of acoustic pianos. Most studios are only going to have space for one piano, maybe two. Whereas with sample libraries, you can have a whole bunch of sample libraries, a load of different sounds. Of course, any of your sample libraries, you can also then shape the sound of those samples a lot within, whatever software it's in, whether it's Contact or its own GUI. So there's loads more versatility there. But I think clients often see the sample libraries and using a MIDI controller as just something they can do at home. In reality, actually, what you're paying for when you go into a professional facility is you're paying for the skill and the knowledge of the engineer, and the engineer knowing that whatever sample library is going to be more appropriate to that song than the actual real acoustic piano, and they're going to know how to get the best sound out of those sample libraries. They're going to know how to direct the artist's performance to get the best performance out of them, and so on. So, really that's what you're paying for. But a lot of the time, a lot of clients don't realize that. They just look at the face value of the equipment they're using. Yeah, in that sense, it's kind of nice having an upright in the studio. It also is just nice in terms of having it as a bit of furniture. It makes the live room look cool. Same with my reed organ. It looks good in any promo with socials and my website and so on. There is something to be said for that. It adds to the vibe and the character of a place. Seeing, these traditional acoustic instruments. It's not the fanciest looking upright piano, but it does, it looks quite nice in the live room. So there's something to be said for that. But yeah, at the same time, I kind of regret having it because it's just not very versatile in its sound. It doesn't get used a whole lot. And then having an upright acoustic piano, unless you want to let it get really out of tune, which it will do if you just leave it, and then eventually it'll get to a point where it's going to be unusable because you're not going to be able to tune it. If it goes too far out of tune, sometimes they're just not savable, and having to tune it would just mean that you might potentially snap some of the strings. Replacing strings on a piano is really expensive, often more than it would be worth spending on the instrument if you've got a cheaper piano. So you have to stay on top of tuning, and that means getting it tuned really, like, at least twice a year, but ideally, depending on how much it's being used, what environment it's being kept in, maybe every couple of months. I usually try and leave it as long as I can, just because it doesn't get used that much. But once I start noticing it going a bit out of tune, I'll call my piano tuner. And normally I think I'd pay around 80 to £100 each time to have it tuned, which is not, it's not too bad. It's not too bad as a general expense of, general business expense. But it is another expense. And when it's for something that doesn't really get used a whole lot, and sounds fairly unremarkable. Don't get me wrong, I have used it on some recordings and gotten pretty decent results, but it's something that I'm never like overly ecstatic about recording. And I'd love to have a piano where, I actually felt confident in its versatility and in its sound, and that it was going to record well. So yeah, in that sense, I do kind of regret having an acoustic piano like the one I've got here in the studio. Yeah, that about wraps this video up. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a like if you did. Comment down below if you have had any regret purchases over the years. I'd love to hear about it. So yeah, sound out in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I'd love it if you did. It helps me out, helps the channel grow. You know the deal. Yeah, and with that said, I'll see you guys again in the next one.